So why were the Jews hauled off to Babylon? Why were they carried off to Babylon in the first place? It's because for 490 years, that is for 70 sevens of years, 70 weeks of years, they did not keep the Sabbath year. They didn't keep the sabbatical year and let the land rest. So if you have 70 groups of 7 years, 490 years, where you don't obey the Lord about the land getting its rest, God decided he would give the land an opportunity to rest for the 70 years that it didn't get during that 490 years. Okay? Now this should sort of be ringing a bell, because the first 490 years that Daniel talks about is actually the 490 years, the 70 weeks of 7 years when they didn't keep the Sabbath year for the land. So they're hauled off to Babylon. They're there for 70 years. The land rests. Then in Daniel chapter 9, Daniel realizes that Jeremiah the prophet had prophesied 70 years and that they would go back again to Jerusalem and, rebuild the city and so on and so forth. And so Daniel is reading this. This is in Daniel chapter 9, the first few verses. The first year of Darius, the son of Ahasuerus, in the first year of his reign, I, Daniel, understood by the books the number of years prophesied by the word of the Lord through Jeremiah the prophet, that he would accomplish 70 years in the desolations of Jerusalem. So the next few verses, Daniel starts praying this prayer of repentance about how rebellious the Jews are and how they won't leave their rebellion. God has every right to, not forgive them, but would God please forgive them and send them back to the land? Okay, now this is really important to understand, because we're talking about the rebellion of the Jews, that they're a rebellious nation. And when we get to the 77s of years that is going to be prophesied for the future, we're also dealing with Israel's rebellion. The problem of rebellion, that's primarily the deal here, is how was God going to deal with the rebellion of the Jews? Daniel prays this prayer of repentance and asks for forgiveness for his people. And then down in verse 20, it says, while he was speaking and praying and confessing my sin and the sins of the people, then it says here, the man Gabriel, whom I'd seen in the vision at the beginning, came to me about the time of the evening offering, and he said, at the beginning of your supplications, I was sent out to give you this message. So for 70 weeks of years, Israel was in rebellion to God. God sent them into captivity 1 year for every year they didn't keep the Sabbath year for the land. Now, what Gabriel is going to say is that there's going to be another group of 70 weeks of years. Okay, another group of 70 weeks of years. Now, I need to tell you right off the bat here that we're not just talking about any random start and end date. If we're talking about sabbatical years here, we're talking about the start date for every one of the sabbatical years is on the Feast of Trumpets, which means that the end date for every one of those sabbatical years, for every year, including sabbatical years, every 7th year, has to either end on the following Feast of Trumpets, or if it's a Jubilee, that is 49 years plus 1, the new year will start on the Day of Atonement. So we're not talking about any kind of random dates here. We're talking about a start date for every year being on the Feast of Trumpets or on the Day of Atonement in a Jubilee year. This is so important to understand. This is what most people who teach a pre-tribulation rapture or any other kind of 7-year tribulation, they are blind to this. They don't understand that we're talking about years the way Jews think of years, which begin in the fall and end in the fall. Okay, so what we have are 77s of years, and by the end of the 77s of years, Israel will no longer be in rebellion. That's what's going to happen by the end of the 70th week. Israel will no longer be in rebellion. Some of the other things that are going to happen is to finish the transgression, and in particular for Israel, to finish the transgression for Israel, to make an end of sins, to make reconciliation for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up the vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. So the Messiah is part of this, Jerusalem is a part of this, and the ending of rebellion for the Jews is a part of this. So one of the things we have to understand is that during this next group of 490 years, Israel will still be in rebellion. Okay, now here's the next section, super important. Daniel 9:25. Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of a command to restore and build Jerusalem until Messiah the Prince, there will be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. Okay, from the command to restore and rebuild the city until Messiah the Prince, there's going to be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. 7 weeks and 62 weeks is 69 groups of 7 years. Every one of those years begins in the fall because we're talking about sabbaticals, okay? We're talking about sabbatical cycles. So even if the decree went out in the spring, which is actually when it happened, the decree went out in April, you don't start counting sabbatical years until the fall. So actually Ezra arrived in the fall and began the count after his arrival. In the fall, there would be 69 weeks of years, or 483 years. So from the time the decree went out, Ezra goes to Jerusalem. In the fall, begin counting. Begin counting 483 years. If you start counting in the fall, you're going to end in the fall, 483 years later. And exactly 483 years later, Messiah would come. Know therefore and understand from the going forth of the command to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until Messiah the Prince will be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. Messiah the Prince will come after 7 weeks and 62 weeks. Messiah the Prince will come after 483 years, sabbatical years which begin in the fall, after the decree. Jesus was anointed by the Spirit at his baptism in the fall of 27 AD. He came right on time. The Jews were expecting him. When John the Baptist showed up a little bit earlier than that, are you the Messiah? Why would they say that? Because they were expecting him 483 years later at the time when the year would start for the Jews in the fall. It says until Messiah the Prince, there's going to be 483 years. He showed up exactly right on time. After the 62 weeks, Messiah the Prince will be cut off. Okay, so we only have 70 weeks, and if we've used up 69 of them, we know that the Messiah the Prince will be cut off in the 70th week, because we've only got 70 weeks here, okay? We've only got 70 weeks. He'll be cut off in the 70th week. And then it says, he'll be cut off, but not for himself. And the people of the prince who is to come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, and the end of it shall be with the flood. Until the end of the war, desolations are determined. So Jesus came, Jesus died, he was cut off, and it was in the 70th week that happened, and then after that, Rome came in and destroyed the city and the temple. Why? Because the Jews rejected their Messiah. They're still in rebellion. They're still in rebellion. Verse 27, then he shall confirm a covenant with many for 1 week. Who's the he? Well, it's the same person we've always been talking about. It's Messiah the Prince, who would come after 69 weeks of years are over. So the 69 weeks of years are over in the fall, and Jesus came at the beginning of the next group of years at the 70th week. So he came and he made a covenant with the many for 1 week. Okay, so this covenant is going to be for 7 years, which means Jesus is going to be involved in the full 7 years for Israel. So when he came at his first coming, he was there for 3.5 years. In the middle of the week, he'll bring an end to sacrifice and offering. And that's exactly what he did. 3.5 years after he arrived, he put an end, or he put to rest, the whole Mosaic sacrifices and offerings. That's what he did. And then we have this little word here, and. And separates the first 3.5 years from the last 3.5 years. And we know the last 3.5 years are going to be 42-month reign of the beast, times and half a time of the worst trouble Israel has ever seen. The 1,260 days when the woman Israel, the remnant of Israel, will be in the wilderness. And on the wing of abominations shall be one who makes desolate. The one who makes desolate is not the he who confirms the covenant. It's a totally different person. It's one who makes desolate. Okay, we're talking about the man who is the abomination that causes desolation, even until the consummation which is determined is poured out on the desolator. All right, so when Christ returns, he is going to bring that person, that one. He'll destroy him. And that's exactly what Paul says in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, that the day of the Lord cannot come until the man of sin is revealed. And the day of the Lord is actually Christ's millennial reign. That's that 1,000-year great day of the Lord. So Daniel's 70 weeks is in this larger context of sabbatical years, that the reason the Jews were in captivity in the first place was because they didn't keep the Sabbath year rest for the land. For 490 years, they didn't do it. And so that left, 70 years that the land didn't get to rest. And then there's 70 years of captivity, so the land got to rest. And it was all caused because of the rebellion of the Jews. And Daniel prays and says, what about our rebellion? How is that going to be cured? And Gabriel comes and says, we got another 490 years here. And it won't be until the end of this next group of 70 weeks of 7 years that finally Israel's rebellion will be over. That Messiah will come at the end of 7 weeks and 62 weeks. The end of it. The end of it. And the end of it is in the fall. The end of it is in the fall. Because we're talking about sabbaticals. Not just any random group of 7 years. And this is where Sir Robert Anderson got off in his calculations. He thought that you should start counting the 69 weeks of years at the exact time, the exact moment, the exact day that the decree was issued. And so he started counting in the spring, and he kind of did some gymnastics there about 360-day prophetic years, so on and so forth. But you don't have to do any of that. A lot of people, including one of my faves, Chuck Missler, teaches that if you do all these mysterious calculations that Sir Robert Anderson did, you're going to end up on Palm Sunday. Okay, that the end of the 69 weeks of years is Palm Sunday. Well, the end of a sabbatical year is always in the fall. September, October. It's never in the spring. So that whole idea is so easily debunked. It's kind of not even funny. So anyway, let me know what you think in the comments section, and we'll see you on another video. Till then, have a blessed day.